Very good afternoon, everyone. Highly respected CS Haribhakti ji, who is going to address this very inspiring and encouraging webcast. Esteemed colleagues, my esteemed colleague in the Council and Vice Chairman of the Committee for Commercial and Economic Laws, CCM Manu Agarwal ji, once again welcoming all of you. And just to give the brief background of the subject ahead, that friends, all of us are aware that India has shown very remarkable resilience in fighting COVID. In a very short time, the country has been put on the recovery path. The country is also now getting more and more recognition in the world leadership. Quarter 2 FY21 results have shown very high ability of the corporates to navigate the companies in challenging times. There have been plenty of progressive steps in the country, including corporate taxation, including attracting foreign investments, monetization of assets, strategic disinvestments of PSUs, public-private partnerships, and very fortunately, at the required time, the rural economy is booming in otherwise the gloomy conditions caused by the pandemic. And in the sectors like IT, the country enjoys sustainable top position internationally. But despite these encouraging situations and the green shoots in the economy, which are many, visioning a 10% GDP growth rate and 15% tax GDP ratio requires a very genius mind and only a visionary mind like CS Haribhakti can visualize the same. So we all know him. He's an outstanding personality in the corporate world. He's a diamond of our profession. But as a matter of protocol and as a matter of pleasure, it is always our desire to know him little more in detail. So I'll request our Directors Committee Secretary, P.S. Shrutika, to briefly introduce Shailesh Bhai, and then I'll request Shailesh Bhai to address us. Shrutika, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Shailesh Haribhakti ji is a renowned chartered and cost accountant and a certified internal auditor, financial planner and fraud examiner with over 4 decades of experience in developing and leading one of the India's most respected and diversified chartered accountancy firm. He is a strong supporter of a clean and green environment, shared value creation, and has pioneered the concept of innovating to zero in the social context. He is an independent board member of a number of leading companies, and he is also a strategic advisor to FTI and CT Group and serves on advisory boards of Doha Bank, etc. Mr. Haribhakti ji has helped create GoWeva, which provides digital productivity enhancement, governance, and compliance support to entities globally. In recent times, some prominent boards and board committees led by him have been recognized with coveted awards, which speak of his penchant for excellence in the areas of corporate governance and sustainability initiatives. He was a visiting faculty at IIM Ahmedabad, and he has led Bombay Management Association, Institute of Internal Auditors, Mumbai, WIRC of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Indian Merchant Chambers, Financial Planning and Standard Boards, India, and Rotary Club of Bombay over the last many decades. He has also served on the Standards Advisory Council of the IASB in London for 2 years and was chairman of NPS Trust from 2015 to 2017. He has been conferred with the Distinguished Fellowship of Institute of Directors Award 2009 by the Institute of Directors. I welcome you, sir, for today's deliberation, and over to you, sir.
Before Shailesh Bhai,
thank you very much, Shrutika.
Let me tell you, friends, that Shailesh Bhai's views have been highly recognized in recent times also on the ET Now television and other top business channels of the country in the context of economic views as well as in the context of the highest probably the restructuring ongoing in view of some disintegration of the top corporate houses. And most importantly, friends, whoever meets Shailesh Bhai, we do experience that he is a very, very loving person and equally lovable person. I am sure in the virtual form also, the reflection will definitely come of his personality. Over to you, Shailesh Bhai.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me tell you that I feel completely at home because I'm speaking to people from my home, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. I have a very deep attachment and love for the Institute, and I'm sure that that is something that all of us as Chartered Accountants develop as we progress in our journey of actually delivering value to not only our employees, our colleagues, our partners, our state, our country, but to the whole world. And therefore, today my message is one which begins with 4 things that we as individuals, as professionals, I would encourage to take on. First of all, I would say, let us truly be stewards of the environment. We have only one planet, which we call our home, planet Earth. And it is absolutely essential that as human beings, we develop that very strong attachment to our planet, to keep it safe, secure, clean, better than what we found it. And I think this is a very crucial element of what we need to hold as foundational values within ourselves when we set out on the task of achieving growth, on the task of making sure that we can contribute something to add value to our entire economy. The second is love for the human race, social responsibility, which is the second alphabet, which is critically important in the framework that we are going to talk about today, stems from the fact that we need to love every living being. That is a fundamental aspect of social responsibility. How can we keep people safe? How can we keep the whole ecosystem of life safe? How can we make sure that it continues to grow? The connects between them are so critical that no matter how much we gain personal advantage, ultimately you will never feel that you have made your contribution if the rest of humanity is not pulled along with you. Just imagine how forlorn and how lonely you would feel if prosperity were to touch just a few of us. And that is the important lesson of some of the ideas that we are going to talk about. Third, that when you get resources and assets in your custody, you need to really operate as a fiduciary, as somebody whose responsibility it has become to make sure that what assets and what advantages have come into your custody are governed using the highest principles of integrity, transparency, disclosure. Because these are the critical things that will make all the difference to the outcomes that we deliver. But all of this will not be possible if each one of us does not perform to our full potential. And that perhaps is the single biggest message that I would like to give today. That the potential that each one of us has is so humongous that if we can find ways to exploit our potential, then we can cascade that potential upward to the corporates that we serve, the NGOs and corporates that we serve, to our cities, to our states, and to our country and to the world. And that is the upward cascade that I would like all of us to hold very clear in our minds as we discuss the subject matter, which I have framed as 17 moonshots. Now you'll ask me, why moonshots? The reason why I chose this terminology is that it focuses attention on the 4 issues that I talked about. And it helps you to take those extraordinary risks, those extraordinary ideas to be implemented. And therefore they are called moonshots. Each one of them is anchored into a sustainable development goal. And therefore we are going to talk about India's 17 moonshots leveraging sustainable development goals. And if we find within ourselves the ability to exploit our full potential and make sure that the ESG framework remains intact, then we can get back to the world-beating performance that India was achieving and must achieve given its natural endowments, which is a growth rate of 10% and a $10 trillion economy. Our Prime Minister has given us the very encouraging thought that we should get to 5 trillion. But it seems that if we get onto the trajectory of 10% compounded growth, there is no reason why we should not reach 10 trillion in another 5 years post the 24 deadline for the 5 trillion economy that has been set for us already. What has given me the confidence to say this dramatic, very bold set of statements? I must say that in crystallizing and conceptualizing these 7 moonshots, I was partnered by Thara TK, who has been with TCS for 22 years and is now working to make sure that this framework actually gets onto platforms. So what have been India's most penetrating reforms? They have been the JAM Trinity, the establishment of Digital India. The UPI, as we have all seen, has recently been recognized as one of the foremost digital initiatives on planet Earth. The extent to which we have digitalized our economy at a lightning speed. We did that first in the context of our stock exchanges and our shares, which all got dematerialized, 100%. Today, not a single transaction in shares can happen without dematerialization. And we went ahead and dematerialized life insurance policies. We've dematerialized so many documents which were creating a mountain of paper in the past. We've got widespread availability of cooking gas, the new education policy. Can you please put my first slide on so that people can follow along with the slides? The new education policy, the changes in company law, tax, the IBC, real estate regulations, the Benami Act, the social security codes, and above all, the agricultural reforms which have been announced recently are all in the direction of fundamentally setting up India for just-old growth. Nobody can stop our growth because we now have the framework and the basis already established to make sure that we can keep growing at a very, very rapid pace. And my target is 10%, nothing short of that. People have the confidence, even after the most severe lockdown on the planet, to rise and conquer. That is the spirit that we have in our nation. All it will take you is a visit to a busy road to see the way that our economy is aiming to come out of its shackles and really go forth, gush forward. That is the feeling that you get the minute you walk onto the roads of any city in India. The corona crisis and its handling with a calm and confident hand, delivering universal basic income and universal basic services to the weakest parts of the population, are indeed very heartening. And why do I say that? Because who was touched most deeply and with what? It was the lowest part, the bottom of our pyramid, was touched with food, with enabling infrastructure to make sure that they could make that food worthy of eating, making sure that all the programs to support them in terms of basic services like health and the available of sanitation, the available of clean water continues unabated, and making sure that the direct benefits actually go to the person for whom they are intended. This has been the biggest transformation in terms of moving resources to rural India. Fortunately, and by God's grace, we've had 2 extraordinary monsoons. Our granaries are full. We are on the verge of becoming a significant exporter of food. And this is what has set the stage for India to rise and become once again the fastest growing nation on earth. The most alluring framework for budget making awaits immediate implementation by our Finance Minister Nirmala Ji. The framework that we are talking about here, and which I will explain to you over the next few minutes that we are together, which if replicated by the 193 countries which are part of the United Nations SDG framework, can change our world completely, can transform our world, riding on the ESG philosophy, which I explained earlier, and making sure that there is a convergence of technology, of implementation thrust, and of all the other good things that are required to make sure that we can combine these 17 moonshots with each other and take the planet into a new orbit. So here is the framework, and I would be very happy if through our institute, this framework is made available to the government of India through the right people who can make the difference. May I have the next slide, please? Here is a simple one-shot snapshot map of the 17 sustainable goals. So while there are 17 goals, there have to be targets. So there are 169 targets which have been laid down. But you can't achieve targets if you do not have indicators, mathematical, computational, which will actually make sure that all of these targets and all of these goals will be met in a particular time frame by very specific actions. And as I said earlier, all 193 countries of the world which supported the SDGs have to chip in, have to come in. Because the time frame that has been laid down is 15 years, from 2015 to 2030. That's the time that the UN laid down. 2019 was an $88 trillion GDP, world GDP year. 2020 may recede a little bit, but the confidence that the world has is that 2021, because of the bounce back, will become a $100 trillion annual GDP world once again. And that is the base that needs and can be leveraged to make sure that we can transform the outcomes which are specified in the 17 SDGs. Sweden ranks number 1 in the world with 85 out of 100 points on implementation of the SDGs. India currently ranks 117th with a score of 61.92. But we have a real chance if we pick up our full might and actually build on all our potential and deliver the value that we can. So very quickly, what are the 17 SDGs? And let me just read them out very quickly so that you get a sense of what these are. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reducing the inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, make it secure, make it safe, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for all these goals to be actually developed. What Maria Fernanda Espinosa said on September 18th in the 73rd UNGA was that India's success in achieving SDGs can change the face of the world. We want to reciprocate by saying that if all 193 countries join hands with us in implementing through a framework on platforms the 17 SDGs, the entire world's outcomes can be transformed. We don't need to be on a low growth path at all. We can be a world of abundance, and India can actually lead a lot of the way and very rapidly rise to the 50th rank, at least, if not higher, in the global ranks of SDGs. The next slide, please. Over the years, the momentum has built, and India has moved massive resources to rural areas, transformed water and sanitation like no other nation on earth. No other nation on earth was able to go from where we were to zero defecation almost in every village in our country. 650,000 villages were made open defecation free. Sanitation, and now the next program will be to make sure that water, clean water, is available on tap to every one of the households that we have built. Path-breaking education reforms, agriculture reforms, labor reforms have all been the major steps which have been already taken. And it is very clear that we will need to mend our financial system in such a way that cheating the depositors will become extraordinarily costly, and therefore hopefully will reduce to a very, very low level which can be easily absorbed and accepted by the financial system. All this needs to now be brought together in the next union budget through targeted interventions that we will now talk about. So the theory is that if we can work on these 17 SDGs, we can build on the reforms that we have put in place. We harness the energies and the potential that we have in our country. We can go to the next level of growth. And our V-shaped victory, which has been talked about hesitatingly, can become visible not only to all of us, but to the whole world. Next slide, please. What we need to do is to align objectives and key themes. What we did is we picked out the key themes of past union budgets, and we have constructed them as union budget objectives. And we tried to correlate them with the key SDG themes. And we found that reducing poverty and unemployment matches with a key SDG theme, which is to end poverty. The reduction of inequalities, reduction in regional differences, and the reallocation of resources are all matched because the SDGs themes are leave no one behind and peace and prosperity for all. The economic stability, economic growth, and the management of public enterprise ideas are all closely interlinked with the ideas or the themes of the SDGs, which are develop sustainably and protect the planet. The union budget objectives and the key SDG themes feed and sustain each other. And that is why the time to align national budgets to SDGs has come. Next slide, please. Why should this alignment happen? Why should national budget and SDGs be aligned? Because they bring together the holistic picture of the nation's priorities, plans, funding, execution, and outcome measurement under one system of governance. This is very critical. Over the years, we have gone on perfecting and innovating our budgetary systems. There is a whole lot of intricacy. Our budgeting process is one of the finest, most well-tuned processes, which does all of these things. It chooses themes, it creates programs, it creates measurements, it creates targets, it makes plans, it allocates resources. This is a very, very critical way that our budgets have been created in the past years. And now if you add the layer of governance and the alignment with SDGs, you can see that we have an opportunity to balance development and sustainability by placing them within the same framework, the ESG framework, the 17 SDGs framework. The success of one fully depends on the delivery of the other. They must sustain each other to create the prosperity that we need. That's another expression that the world has begun using. Planet, people, prosperity. The 3 Ps of development and growth. And this is the way that we can take growth forward, not only in our country, but in the whole world. Next slide, please. So what are our goals? The goals of an SDG-aligned budget. A summarized, targeted reflection of achievements across all national SDG indicators. 1, we should make sure that universal basic income and services are available to all by 2023. Nobody should be left behind. We cannot have a single person in India going hungry. We cannot have a single child in India not going to school. We cannot have a single human being in India not having access to medical facilities which they might need. 2, we must raise our rankings on the SDG scale to at least 50, if not higher. And I think this is absolutely possible if we set our minds and targets on it. And we need to be a $20 trillion economy by 2027. This is something that is possible and that we must aim towards. Next slide, please. So how can sustainable development towards a 10 trillion economy happen? Here's the how of it. At the center of everything is to maximize the availability of decent work and economic growth, SDG 8. To deliver the 14 other SDGs through a cause and effect model, we call that the SDG 8 chain action. Achieve this chain action through targeted interventions, much as we have been doing in the past, but with a slightly more polished framework across strategy, business models, technology, policies, governance, to reach the goals of an SDG-aligned budget. Summarize a reflection of targeted achievements across national SDG indicators, which we talked about in the previous slide. This same framework has to be cascaded down to every state in our country, every city municipal corporation, to all our communities and ecosystems, to corporations and to individuals. It is only with this cascading that the alignment and the synergy and the joint working of the SDG 8 chain action will start giving us the amazing results that we will show in our next slide. Next slide, please. This is the chain action. So what we have done is identified the 2 foundational SDGs in an SDG-driven budget. So what are these foundational SDGs? They are SDG 16 and SDG 17. SDG 16 talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions, and SDG 17 talks about partnerships for the goals. We need to change our mindset to becoming collaborative, to becoming innovative, aligned, agile, completely adaptable to whatever challenges are thrown at us. We need to get adaptable and make sure that we can meet them. But to do this, we need to create decent work, which, as you see, is at the center of this whole framework, the SDG 8, decent work and growth. So what are the things that we can do which will entail the deployment of people? The provision of clean water and sanitation. As we saw, the build out of all of the non-open defecation opportunities to have proper sanitation is a massive task involving a huge number of people and massive outlays from the budget. Equally, the clean water initiatives, Har Ghar Nal or Har Nal Se Jal, both these programs will require a massive quantity of both labor and resources to be deployed to make the impact happen and continue to happen over the next year. Affordable and clean energy. India has already taken a lead in renewable energy, but this is the path on which we can accelerate dramatically. Because for the first time in our history of the earth, the cost of producing renewable power has got aligned to the cost of fossil fuel power. And if you add to that the societal costs, the pollution costs of actually continuing to use fossil fuel-based power sources, makes it cheaper today to have affordable and cleaner energy. What we need to do, as I will show a little later, is to dramatically cut off the cross-subsidies and make sure that we have a proper pricing system which will make power available, clean power available, at an affordable price to every human being who needs to engage in activity to make sure that they can impact the SDGs in the way that we wish. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. India has already embarked on a path of Atmanirbharta, which is a path which puts Indian industry, Indian innovation, and Indian infrastructure at the center. And that has to be fully powered by creation of decent work, by allocation of resources. Sustainable cities and communities. Now here, we have a unique opportunity for a moonshot, which we define as 100,000 villages becoming smart villages. Why should we think only of cities to be smart? Why can India not lead the world by showing that rural communities can be made smart? And then the idea of responsible consumption and responsible production. All of this will continue to create new jobs. We call these Group 1 SDGs, which will continuously enable us to create jobs. Now, while we are doing that, the longer term impact, both in terms of the input and in some cases you will see equally matched by the output, we need to bring to bear. So what will create the long-term impact? Good health and well-being. Nothing has focused our mind on healthcare as COVID has. We created the largest capacity of PPEs, masks. We created so many beds on which people could be treated. We transformed so many homes to places where we could quarantine people, treat them, telehealth. All of that was done in a compressed crunch period of 6 to 7 months. Now has become the time to take all of this out of the home and the very small, very low impact idea to a very high impact national program. Quality education. The new education policy transforms the opportunities for digital learning, for learning from a teacher anywhere in the world, from setting up a classroom anywhere, for making sure that you can take the best in class of syllabus from wherever you can find it, combine it, and teach in a way that you can have quality education for all. Climate action. As I said earlier, we have only one planet. Fundamental to it is how we will make sure that we preserve our planet. Life below water is extremely crucial. So many nations and so many human beings are dependent on life below water. Today, what has even begun to happen is extreme low-cost mining of the seabed. And the law on that and the sharing of those resources, all of these ideas have become the remit of the Life Below Water 14 number SDG. Life on land. Just imagine the transformation we can achieve with distressed habitats being converted to productive, green, absolutely high-yielding spaces for good agriculture. Now you can see that these Group 1 SDGs will combine with each other and trigger SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And what that will result in is it will eliminate poverty. It will create zero hunger, the possibility of zero hunger. We have enough food. It's a question of distribution, availability, and democratized pricing. Good health and well-being for all. You said that that is something that we need to work on a foundational basis, and the outcome will be people who will be able to perform on a continuous basis the decent work and make sure that the economic growth happens. Quality education, which we talked about. Gender equality. Why should the same treatment not be given to both genders? The time for that has absolutely come. Our legal system has moved in that direction, and the call of the SDGs is also to make sure that gender equality is established. Clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, and reduced inequalities. So these group 2 outcomes will then need to be reported in a framework. Let's go to the next slide. The SDG 8 chain action maximizes SDG 8 to deliver 14 other SDGs through cause and effect. So what will need to be done is invest the funds primarily on Group 1 SDGs with an intent to create jobs and lift SDG 8. Decent work and economic growth has to follow. Specific opportunities, projects in each SDG area will need to be devised to deliver this strategy. One set of Group 1 SDGs to create quick returns in terms of jobs and a significant boost to SDG 8, while the others, Group 1 SDGs, will need to be delivered to meet respective long-term goals. The spend proportion across SDGs will have to be maintained to maintain the equilibrium between them as is needed to deliver the outcomes. The Group 1 SDGs will deliver SDG 8, which in turn will trigger progress on Group 2 SDGs directly or indirectly. What we will then need to do is to mock test this strategy using available data models, which are already available in the government, with the government. The SDG targets and strategy are to be devised keeping in mind the technology leverage, plan the risks, plan the traceability, and the measurement indices. Next slide, please. So the targeted interventions will happen across, as I said, strategy, business models, technology, governance, and policies to achieve the 3 goals. Next slide. So what are these targeted interventions? In the area of strategy, to deliver the budget goals, we will need to empower states. To my mind, that is the most critical aspect. And we already have the Finance Commission's recommendations this year to transfer over 41% of the revenues to the states. Active cooperative federalism will require a capacity enhancement at the state level, a working which is coordinated between center and state to make sure that all the new social security codes, the labor law that we are talking about, will be implemented. The agricultural reforms will start delivering value in terms of money in the hands of the farm sector, the rural population. Embrace globalization and free markets, which is exactly the reform that has happened. And now it will be necessary for every state government to start notifying these laws, supporting them, making sure that these laws actually start having their bite. Set the central government's primary focus on governance. Convert undertakings to corporate in terms of the business model change. Embrace PPPs, which is something that Tarun Bhai mentioned at the beginning of his remarks. Enable investment based on SDG implementation effectiveness. Open up health and education to private and global investments. That's the business model change that we will need to accomplish. Take technology. We can unleash the power of technology. There has never been a time in the history of our earth where we have the means today to make sure that every human being can be successful. Every human being can have a sense of abundance. The technology, the resources, the enablement is there. And why is it there? Because we are now undergoing a new revolution, which is driven by internet, by the cloud, by the fact that we have unlimited ability to compute, unlimited storage space, unlimited ability to do analytics. So what are the technologies that we will need to deploy? Artificial or augmented intelligence, machine learning, AR and VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, big data analytics, Internet of Things. So the whole idea that we participate in the trillion sensor industrial age that is now coming, chip manufacturing, wherever it is possible, electric and autonomous mobility to reduce further the burden of pollution, vertical agriculture, 3D printing, additive versus subtractive manufacturing, biotechnology, Wi-Fi for all, significantly depend on renewables. 90% in 6 years is the target that we would recommend we should adopt. In terms of governance, devise and establish global best practice governance across all walks of society, particularly to achieve the goals, strategy, and business models. Diversify boards in every way, whether it is gender, competence, age, ability, sensitivity, every which way. Extreme simplification of process, of law, of compliance capability. Discard all non-productive activities. If these tenets of governance are put in place, we will have the gestalt intervention which is required. In terms of policy, is required to enable the goals, strategy, business models, technology, and governance. Extremely efficient judiciary to support this whole process. Every judgment within 6 months. Instant payment of all government dues. These are the policy intervention and changes that we will need. Next slide, please. So, can we exemplify these interventions through examples? And to exemplify these interventions, we chose to bring to your attention 17 moonshots. Next slide, please. These are transformational solutions for a transformed world. So what are these 17? And what we've done is, for each moonshot, we've identified the SDGs that will be primarily affected or will have to be leveraged to make these moonshots actually happen. Focus on the most disadvantaged by making UBI and UBS available to all. The idea and the measure has to be to raise per capita rural GDP to $5,000 by 2027. This is the goal that we can easily set and achieve, because that is what it will take for us to get to the level where we came from. 2, find and feed every hungry Indian. That's a true moonshot. Aim to ensure every grain is consumed or stored safely. We cannot afford to have a single kilo of our grain, which our farmers have through great sweat and toil been able to produce, to go waste. Food stocks grow in value and respect by consumption. not in poor storage. And therefore, it is critical that not only storage, but distribution, availability, all of that has to be made into a systematic approach. 3, empower every woman. Employ entire willing female population by filling up every vacancy in every government and private enterprise. Ensure each one has a smartphone with a self-learning app to enhance the skills required. Again, very feasible, simple to achieve. 1:1 correspondence. We know the numbers. We know what we need to do. We know what the gaps are. And it is critical that these gaps are actually made good. 4, make all last mile irrigation deliver water. This is critical. Every project which is in progress needs to be completed. Every one of them. Every incomplete irrigation project in the next 6 months in a mission mode. Implement strict sanitation laws universally and tap every home and clean water from every tap. A tap for every home and clean water from every tap. That fantastic adage or slogan needs to be implemented. Next slide, please. 5, 3D print 10 million homes. Safe homes for all. This is feasible, very much done, demonstrated. Where? In Latin America. Why not in India? 6, dramatically reduce inequalities through implementation of the social security codes, the 4 codes that we have just brought into existence. Every state government needs to implement the 4 social security codes on wages, social security, industrial relations, and occupational safety and health. The middle class will double, should double in a 6 months' time if these interventions are made to 500. We are already at close to 350 to 400 million. So we need to get 100 million people to make sure that we can move them to this level. Healthcare, we need to digitize, bring in telemedicine, bring in vaccination, bring in home care. Every Indian must have a digital record of their genome and their gut microbiome. This is feasible. This has gone down to a cost of close to $100 or 7,500 rupees. Digitize all health and medical ingesting history so that diagnosis and medical specifications are done on a personalized basis using telemedicine. Move sick care to healthcare through vaccination. Immunize. Enhance the immunization through plant extracts, which are available plenty in India. Emphasize personal hygiene and yoga. Encourage all of this to happen at scale. Bring in telemedicine infrastructure to ensure home care at scale. Next slide. Quadruple farmer income. A revolution in food and grain trade. Convert people to entrepreneurship in agriculture. Make them agripreneur. Enable remigration to villages. Multi-cropping, pulse growing, seed multiplication, vertical agriculture, technology-enabled agriculture, artificial intelligence-based pesticide delivery, mechanical harvesting, robotic baling, autonomous tractors and ATVs, establish the cold chains, 5-fold increase in microfinance and two-wheeler dealerships. And you can see that the entire purchasing power and the ability to bring about the agripreneurial revolution will be enabled. Education. We talked about the new education policy. Open up. 100% net enrollment ratio has to be the objective, has to be the measure. Universal adoption of the NEP. open up education to private and global investment, learning and teaching to be brought to every Indian from the best source in the world, achieve 100% net enrollment ratio in elementary and secondary education through phygital schools, a combination of physical and digital schools in 2 years' time. Pivot power to 90% renewable energy, something that I have talked about a lot during this hour. Accelerate the journey by decentralizing and democratize pricing. Preferential tariffs for the low-level consumptions, all of the subsidies must go. This is critical. All power consumption to be metered honestly, and average price to go down drastically. It's only then can we really deliver the promise of 90% renewable energy. Next slide. Deliver decent work for all by bringing accountability to center stage. No permanent tenure to anybody. Lifelong learning, continuous improvement, and reskilling for relevance must be a continuous automated effort. Zero employment exchange pendency has to be the final count that will enable us to see that we have reached there. Massive industry innovation and technology adoption for 10x productivity. 1 million 4.0 factories making world-class flawless products. Transform manufacturing to additive from subtractive. Robotize and automatize moving parts. Massively scale up the use of AR and VR. 3D printed meat. Materials embedded in zombie smokestack plants to be retrieved and redirected to any sector as a source of material for 3D printing and manufacturing. Digital infrastructure for all, making swift and cheap Wi-Fi available at a very low latency for all. Connected internet device for every Indian, uninterrupted and at affordable cost. 14th moonshot, make all rural and urban interventions climate resilient, independent of monsoon by 2022. Next slide. Reimagine all spaces, reignite real estate, seamlessly blend multi-use, proportionate ownership, and sharing economy ideas. Homes would have space for office, a table that can act as a restaurant table, a room for home medical treatment, a gaming and entertainment zone, and a living space. Same goes for all factories with added space for R&D. Almost every mall, post office, or other space to multitask as educational, healthcare, entertainment, training, and other engagement space. Taxation, and this is something that all of us are keenly interested in and have been asking for. Simplify the personal income tax even further. Make tax filing unnecessary as we pivot to tax determination. Ultra simplified GST. No exemptions, no composition. 3 rates, 0, 10, and 15. Uniform laws for all states. Encourage external trade by pivoting to a simplified and low import duty regime. Zero litigation. All unutilized past incentives to be permitted as set off, so that no promissory extorpel is defeated. And finally, extremely efficient judiciary. For anything to really progress, we need e-courts, robo-judges, algorithm-driven decisions, speech-to-text enablement, and no pendency beyond 6 months. These are the 17 SDGs. Next slide, please. Aligning the national budget to SDGs. Quick solution for 2021. Next slide. You can see that we have picked from the way the budget is actually presented on the left-hand side, where we are talking about the UN SDGs, transforming into national SDGs, and the targets. We have 54 targets in our budgeting system. Indicators, which we use for measurement already in our budgeting process. Allocate the funding required. Target it to the SDGs. Use the framework that we've described earlier and the moonshots that we talked about. Establish the final budget and goals, and make sure that the traditional union budget process is transformed to make it compatible with the SDGs. And then have a system for measuring and monitoring the budget performance and reporting it back at 6 monthly intervals. Next slide, please. So how do we do this as a quick adoption of the budget to the SDGs? Leverage the existing budget processes and national SDG budgeting and measurement process with minimal modifications and extensions to achieve the SDG-based budgeting in 2021. The Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation today supports tracking and measurement across 54 SDG targets and 100 SDG indicators already. The budget with each SDG with traceability to the SDG targets would apply the chain action theory that we've talked about, use the targeted interventions explained earlier, and this can result in one version of the national budget, say SDG Budget 1. Map the draft union budget profile of 2021 to the respective SDG indicators and corresponding budgets allocated. This forms the SDG Budget 2. The next slide will further amplify this. Compare these two budgets and make informed decisions on the differences to finalize the budget based on SDGs. And these need to be measured in a systematic manner using the current MOSPI processes. The measurements in turn should reflect budget performance and goal delivery. The process can be made more efficient and optimized in subsequent years as we gain experience. Next slide. What we have done in this slide is to take from the past union budget of 2020, the size of the budget and every source from which the budget was prepared. Apply this to raise the target of taxes to 35% of GDP and make sure that there's a direct mapping to the SDGs and a direct and indirect mapping of these secondary goals to make sure that the entire budget comes together in terms of an iterative process which will enable the entire movement, the absorption of the 17 moonshots into the framework, which we will show in the next slide. Next slide, please. So here is, in this slide, you see the budget to SDG indicators mapping. And we've illustrated it by talking about the National Rural Drinking Water Program, the Moonshot 5, the 3D printing of 10 million homes, safe homes for all. Looked at the SDGs, created the targets, and made sure that the indicators that are already being used in our budgeting process continue to be used in order that the budget actually delivers to the new framework. Next slide. Technology-enabled virtuous cycle needs to be put in place, reinforced through the feedback loop. That is going to be the significant way in which this whole framework will get further elaborated. Next slide. The framework implementation will be leveraged by digital technology, which we've talked about, predictive models, big data, and blockchain. And the ideas are to make sure that the planning happens, the setup is done, the execution is tailor-made to the requirements, and then measure, report, and improve. All of this within the framework of the technologies that we had indicated are necessary. Now, if you put all of this, next slide, please. If you put all of this together, and the next slide. So this is the National Integrated Report. Once we have done all of these processes, you will then, next slide, have finally a national integrated report which reports to us as the population of India on the 6 capitals: the natural capital, the human capital, the financial capital, manufactured capital, social and relationship capital, and the intellectual capital. And the process will build through the universal goals by performing effectively the activities which are required, use the 5 intervention modes, and deliver the output in terms of the mentioned matrices that we've talked about. What we will then see is an outcome based on compliance with all the 17 SDGs by India, thereby raising our entire performance to best in class and leading the way to make sure that other countries can follow and make sure that this approach can deliver through cascading impacts right down to the last person, transformational results. No reason why India cannot achieve its 10% growth in a $10 trillion economy by 2027. And to this great goal, friends, we commend that this framework be absorbed into your DNA in order to make it your potential to make sure that the change that we desire can actually happen. Thank you very much. We can now move. Give me 30 seconds to put on the lights.
Wonderful presentation, Shailesh Bhai.
Thank
as
you,
was expected.
Bhai.
As was
Thank
expected
you very
from
much.
you. And it will be our privilege and pleasure, sir, to use this presentation and framework so that it reaches in appropriate form under guidance from you to the government, because it is so beautiful and so encouraging for the entire nation. So with this, I will hand over the proceedings to our Vice Chairman, C. Manu Agarwal ji.
Thank you, Tarun Bhai. And as you very rightly said, a very beautiful and wonderful presentation, basically outlining how the country will reach towards a 10 trillion economy. And I think the presentation was so nicely made that we have just probably one query. I think I'll just give me half a minute and I'll straight away come to the query. And that also is not basically a query, it's a thought which has come. So there is one member from Hyderabad who's written, when we are reaching our targeted 5 trillion economy with current COVID slowdown, when are we reaching? It will take more than 7 years. After that, with a 10% compounded rate to reach 10 trillions, it will require around 15% compounded growth to double the economy in 5 years. What are your reactions? Basically, it's a viewpoint which he has given, and he's asking for your comments.
So I would just like to respond by saying that we need to change our linear thinking to exponential thinking. You know, at a very base level, we think only of incremental arithmetical progression type of growth rates. Whereas just think about 10% compounded annual growth rate from next year onwards. And you will see there are certain years in which the growth can accelerate dramatically. Because when the forces build up, suddenly you will see a huge gestalt growth increase in growth. And that can happen because of the convergence of technologies which have already become visible. The greatest advantage that I see today is that we have built ourselves up. We have done the hard work of making the reforms which are required to build this high growth platform. That's why I can imagine a compounded annual growth rate, which can itself accelerate in a way that it will lead us to the $10 trillion mark by 2027. So it won't look mathematically correct. You just need to look at the whole thing in a exponential mindset as opposed to a linear mindset. So here it's not a matter of arithmetic. It is a matter of fresh thinking, new mindset.
Yes, sir. I think you are very correct, and you have very rightly pointed out that it's a matter of exponential growth and exponential thinking. And I think, we saw a very big reform of the whole income tax department going faceless, and it just took about a few months to get it up and rolling. Things which probably pre-COVID could never have been thought of have actually happened. The people in the house, even ladies, even old age people have adopted to this technology in just 1.5 months, and everybody is now onto that technology. So things are really happening at such a fast pace, and with all the reforms in place, I think you're very correct, and with the country headed for that kind of change, that kind of intent in the leadership, I think the changes will come sure and fast. With this, I think that we have no more questions. I think the deliberations were so clear that there's no questions. So if the chairman, we've got one small thing, one or two questions, one from Singapore, which is coming in. Sir, you have already engaged, have you already engaged the FM and Finance Ministry officials? How receptive are they to your suggestions?
You know, for that, I have to count on my institute to do the institutional heavy lifting to take it to the government. And that's what I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. But in my own small way, I have interacted, and this presentation has gone to the right places in the government of India already. And in my own way, whenever I get a chance, I speak to the economic advisor to the government of India or to people who are going to be influencing the course. I spoke to the past finance secretary, the past revenue secretary of India, and just trying to get as much of support for this, because India is a signatory to the SDGs. India has shown great heart and leadership qualities already. So now it's a question of all of us working together. And I have no doubt that we have a receptive government which will accept these propositions and move forward rather rapidly. So I have no doubt that the receptivity for these ideas already exists, and it will take the joint efforts of chambers of commerce, which I'm working with, and the Institute of Chartered Accountants and everybody together to make sure that this reaches the right years. But thank you for that question. Very, very interesting.
Another question, sir, is, for achieving these results, will the existing resources be enough? What are you suggesting in this fiscal deficit? To what percentage level?
You know, we have sufficient resources. So to answer the first question, no doubt in my mind. Actually, if we set our minds to it and we are able to close off on all our incomplete projects in a very speedy manner, We have multiple irrigation projects, multiple infrastructure projects, which can be speeded up and accelerated. And it's just a question of making the right resources from the right sources available. Fiscal deficit is a question and a bugbear that all economists in the world have given us the clear green light, that we have been extremely circumspect. How did we manage the COVID situation? We managed it largely through two interventions. Food being made available to the bottom of the pyramid, gas and other rations being available, and the financial system delivering credit. So far we have done it in a very reasonable, measured way through food and financial availability. Going forward, investments will be necessary. The good news for us is that the world is waiting with a whole tsunami of money. This money that has been printed and has been made available in the world as a response to COVID has been incredible. All of that money is waiting to get deployed. Alpha and yield will happen in economies like us, which are thirsty for investment. So if we can create the sensible, easy path to investments in India, no dearth of resources, we have been prudent fiscally, and therefore we have the monetary power in reserve to now unleash as investments. And if we create the enabling environment, and if all of us decide to work together, no dearth of resources.
Shailesh bhai, the next question again is, the economy could not be in a position to reach $5 trillion as projected by the central government due to huge subsidies and freebies by central and state governments.
You know,
that's basically...
at one point in time, I had a very strong notion that subsidies should be transformed into investments. And I think in a limited way, that message has already been picked up. We have been able to reduce the fuel subsidy fairly significantly. The subsidy that we have not been able to touch is the food and the fertilizer subsidy. Those two have not been touched by our governments. And there is a case to see if we can transform some of these resources which are going by way of subsidies into investment-driven grants. If that can happen, if that targeting can happen, I can see a huge amount of good happening. But even if we do 2.5% of subsidies, which is what the current level of subsidies is in our budget, we do not compromise our achievement targets significantly if the subsidy actually reaches to the direct benefit transfer mode to the bottom of the pyramid, and it is used for responsible consumption and responsible production.
Yes. So there's a follow-up question. Can you please explain how we can reach agriculture yield independent of monsoons?
Irrigation, percolation, drip irrigation, modern technology in agriculture, multi-cropping, wherever it is feasible, vertical farming. You know, this whole idea of aeroponic and hydroponic. So what we have in urban India today, I've installed it in my own house, is a system of vertical agriculture where we are feeding the water to the open roots. No soil, soilless agriculture, where the water is fed directly to the roots. The nutrition is fed directly to the roots, aeroponically and hydroponically. And what that does is, in a concentrated way, we've not yet used artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance the yield, but that's the next step. And this is all feasible technology today. It has to be in every home. It has to be ubiquitously experimented with. And it can be done at scale because we have such massive land resources, which will now, because irrigation projects will close, good news for our country is that many irrigation projects are about to become productive. We need to do that last 6 month, last mile effort to make sure that they start delivering water where the parched earth is waiting for that water to come in. But we can equally go with all of these other things, which I talked about.
Sir, now the last question which I'll take is basically, do the moonshots presume that there would be a cascading effect? If yes, it does depend completely upon the implementation of policies. Also, we did not find mention of corruption-free governance. That itself could become a huge catalyst towards exponential growth. Your thoughts in this direction?
I'm completely for complete corruption-free governance. If we have good governance, it will automatically be corruption-free. Because if you are transparent and you disclose, then it's extremely difficult to hide the wrongdoings that might today be happening. And it is happening. So therefore, there is no shying away from that. But my own sense is that we have now gathered our regulatory frameworks, our court processes, our judicial processes, and geared them up in a way that people will think 10 times before either offering a corruption money or taking it. And therefore, that fear has been now instilled. And therefore, I think the outcomes can be quite different. I have no doubt that we do need a corruption-free governance. I have no doubt that we have a long way to go in terms of speeding up the judicial process and making sure that where there is wrongdoing, it gets discovered early and gets corrected. But the best outcome will be if it can be prevented, because there is abundance. There's so much of resources. There's so much good work to do, decent work to actually do. There's no need to have that kind of speed money or corruption money that you are talking about, which needs to be expended to make the world go round. That is the future that we need to work towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Shailesh Bhai. It's been a wonderful presentation and full of optimism, which I personally also support.
Thank you.
Really believe that this is something which will happen in the very near future. So I thank you for this wonderful presentation. I thank the chairman of the committee, Tarun Bhai, for organizing such a wonderful program, for having you here. And I thank all the committee members, the committee staff who has been instrumental in organizing this webinar. And plus, last but not the least, all the viewers. I think we had more than 1,200 people who attended this webinar. I thank all of them and thank to all those who asked the questions. And once again, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.